Historically, if you read about slavery and what happened, it's wrenching, but it happened a long time ago. This is what's happening today. And so for me, it's very visceral. It's you know, you can't believe the inhumanity that one person can visit on another.
Modern slavery is used as a catch-all kind of term, so it's used to refer to many different things. I think it's useful at the moment in the contemporary context because people respond to it. About a decade ago, everyone was responding to human trafficking. There's less of a concern around trafficking specifically and more of a concern around broader practices of exploitation. Modern slavery in Australia includes forced marriage, human trafficking, and slavery-like practices broadly.
The most recent estimate is that there are about 40.3 million people in some form of modern slavery around the world. When you break that down, about 71% are women and girls. Australia is certainly not exempt from this issue. My research has been within the construction industry and the agricultural industry, but we're seeing it everywhere. The cotton fields, it's in our orange fields, grapes, horticulture, all forms of exploitation are happening here in Australia.
We found that more than half countries don't have proper legislation in place because they thought slavery was no longer, but in fact it is. And so my mission is to ensure that all states have the legislation to hold people responsible for modern slavery. You have this movement, at least with regards to modern slavery, in California first, with regards to businesses, and then the United Kingdom, and we're in the process in Australia of doing the same thing.
I was raped by the director of the orphanage several times. I'm sure I'm not the only one he did this to. He must have done it to the other girl too.
There are an estimated 4,500 people estimated to be under modern slavery in Australia, whether it's sexual slavery, forced marriage, orphanage trafficking, the trafficking of people, debt bondage, and a whole range of other issues where people basically can't walk free from that situation.
The exploitation of others is done by people who are very able to cut themselves off and deny the moral wrongness of it. I was involved in working with a woman who unfortunately did become enslaved by exactly that process of being sponsored to Australia to what she thought was a reputable occupation. As it turned out, the sponsorship was organised by a very unscrupulous gang, and she was then told that basically she could not do anything except to pay them back $50,000. And unfortunately, this young woman was then put into prostitution and forced to work in this way. So eventually she managed to run away and escape. There's great difficulties with this particular patient, as well as many other women, to be able to be reliable witnesses. I've been delighted working with the magistrates as part of the magistrates' ongoing professional development, a cross-disciplinary discussion, which is just magnificent, that they're very keen to understand more about the psychological processes and difficulties that witnesses might have, particularly with complex trauma.
Our collaboration with the Australian Federal Police represents an exciting opportunity for law enforcement and universities to collaborate, particularly around the field of eliminating and addressing the problem of child exploitation material online. What we are trying to achieve is to use automatic machine learning mechanisms to classify these images in such a way that human beings do not need to view the material themselves.
I've seen members who struggle to deal with the actual viewing of that material. Also the stress that it actually places them under, the stress that it actually puts on team cohesiveness, but also the detrimental effect that it has on their family lives and their personal lives as well.
The first step is to train the computer to recognise what is legal material so that it can differentiate legal from illegal material. We then get to the point where the algorithm can produce a score, a number, that indicates the depravity, if you like, of the image and how serious the image is from a law enforcement point of view.
What we're really hoping is that we'll actually get computers to start to do some of that heavy lifting in terms of automatically identifying the material and classifying it so our police officers don't have to view it to take to court.
We simply don't know how prevalent forced marriage is in Australia. Very little empirical research has been done. A lot of people are very ashamed to report it, fearful of consequences and unwilling to implicate what are often their family members. It is predominantly not a legal problem. It is a family problem. It is a social problem. It often has economic roots. It has various factors that make it very, very difficult for a quick fix legal solution. In order to get the assistance you need, you are effectively asked to dob in your family.
I think what we have found is the law has not always been the primary mechanism in which to change behaviours. What we have seen when we're trying to counter different forms of exploitation, a whole range of regulatory mechanisms I think should be put before us to consider before we rush into practices of criminalisation.
Most cases of human trafficking are not extreme situations of exploitation. Last year I spent a lot of time doing work with people who are working unlawfully in Australia. Their interest is working and making money. So if they experience exploitation, they tend to move on. They're not interested in criminal justice outcomes or anything else that we think is important because their focus is on making as much money as they can, essentially until they get caught by immigration and sent home.
Business has to start looking at their supply chains and the nature of exploitation that can happen in the third, fourth tier of supply chains. One that I'm quite familiar with is the fashion revolution. The aim of the fashion revolution is to really make consumers aware of their purchasing behaviour. It's about making sure that we as consumers understand the conditions that the people that make our clothes are in and then making decisions or shaping those decisions in a way that we can help them improve their standard living conditions. A Deloitte report came out recently that essentially showed that if you put an extra 21 cents on a T-shirt, you would ensure that workers on the factory floor would be earning a living wage. Not a factory wage, a living wage.
Australians are buying things from all over the world, so it's often said that your mobile phone and that supply chain, somewhere in there is some slave labour.
Monash plays a key leadership role in relation to modern slavery in bringing together a whole range of different disciplinary approaches to provide just that robust evidence base. The Border and Crossing Observatory came about some years ago. I think probably one of our most significant contributions has been around the establishment of the Australian Border Deaths Database. That's the only available record of those people who have died while attempting to reach Australia. That has been not only in relation to deaths that have occurred at sea, but also deaths upon return to home countries, deaths in immigration detention, and a whole host of other deaths that have been able to be associated with crossing borders.
Monash has given me the world. I came here as a migrant, as someone who even couldn't speak proper English. Monash offered me the full scholarship, and on top of the scholarship, I was offered a teaching position. My PhD is on Ethiopia's response to human trafficking Ethiopia as a source country. And I looked at the vulnerability factors to trafficking, mainly within the context of trafficking for domestic work purpose. I hope my PhD will help the Ethiopian government suppress the trafficking problem and assist vulnerable groups of Ethiopian.
Because of Monash's size and scale, but most importantly, because of our partnerships with communities, with organisations and with governments, they can play a critical role in bringing people together, including bringing together other universities in order to be able to rise to the challenge we currently face.